The kitchen smelled of seared meat and overcooked vegetables. The air so thick it pressed down on my chest. I leaned over the sink, sleeves rolled up, water running cold over my hands as I scrubbed another plate. Then it hit. Pain shot through my ribs so sharply, I thought my knees might give out right there on the tile. My breath caught, shallow and jagged. The edge of the counter suddenly the only thing keeping me upright. Stop whining. Soldiers don't complain. My uncle's voice cut across the room like a whip. Even retired Colonel Hans Muller carried the same command presence that had once bent platoons to his will. To him, my silence wasn't strength. It was expected obedience. And when sound did escape me, even a gasp of pain, it was weakness he couldn't tolerate. Across the room, Anna leaned against the fridge, Marine Corps sweatshirt hanging loose on her shoulders, arms crossed like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Her grin spread slow, cruel. "Look at her," she said. Laughter caught in her throat. Our tough lieutenant home from overseas, folding under kitchen duty. The dish slipped from my fingers, clattering in the sink. I pressed a palm to my side, trying to disguise the tremor in my arm as I reached for another plate. The water kept running, but the noise in the room was sharper. The scrape of my uncle's chair, the tap of his boots against the floor, the silence that followed, heavy as a loaded weapon. I didn't look at him. Not yet. I stared at the thin trail of soap sliding down the drain, counting each breath like I used to count seconds under enemy fire. Out there in uniform, I knew what to expect. Orders, danger, survival. Here in the house that had never softened, even after my mother was gone, the rules were murkier and somehow harsher. My back straightened out of reflex when I felt his presence behind me. "You think deployment gives you an excuse?" His tone wasn't raised, but each word landed like a blow. "You're still under my roof. You'll carry your weight, injury or not." The pain radiated deeper, spreading through my side until I could feel it in my jaw. I wanted to turn, to defend myself, to say something, anything, but Anna's laugh filled the gap, sharper than the clatter of utensils on the counter. She mimed clutching her ribs, doubling over in fake agony. "Better call the medics," she said. "Lieutenant Muller's got a paper cut." Heat rose in my face, shame braided tight with anger, but I swallowed it down. That was the training, too. Never give them what they're looking for. My hands moved automatically, scrubbing, rinsing, stacking, each motion mechanical, each breath a test against the tightening band inside my chest. Outside, I heard the faint hum of an engine rolling past the base housing. Just an ordinary sound, but in that moment, it was enough to remind me the world still turned beyond these walls. Inside, though, the kitchen closed in. The smell of grease, the echo of laughter, the cold command of a man who once taught me discipline but never mercy. I wish I could say the cruelty in that kitchen began only after I returned from deployment, but the truth is it had been rehearsed in me for years. Our house had never really been a home. It was a barracks dressed in brick and drywall. After my mother died, silence took her place, and my uncle filled every corner of it with discipline. The dining table became a parade ground, and the living room a drill yard. Anna flourished in it. She was strong, quick to obey, and eager to perform. My uncle called her a born soldier, a phrase that followed her like a medal even before she put on a uniform. Every stumble of mine only made Anna shine brighter. She carried herself like a hero in training. And in my uncle's eyes, that's exactly what she was. I was different. Sensitive, my teachers used to say. Quick to notice small things others missed. The change in a friend's tone, the strain in someone's eyes. But in our house, that wasn't seen as awareness. It was weakness. My uncle would say, I didn't have the stomach for the job. And his words weren't about the military. They were about life itself. I still remember the day I fell during one of his backyard training sessions. I was 8. He had set up an obstacle course with sandbags and a rope climb, determined to turn us into soldiers before we were even teenagers. I slipped, landed hard, and heard the snap in my arm before the pain caught up. I cradled it to my chest, tears streaming. He didn't rush to help. He didn't even ask if I could move my fingers. Instead, he shoved a stack of dishes toward me once we were back inside. "Wash these first," he said. "Then we'll see if it's really broken." I remember the sting of soap and water against trembling hands, the weight of plates slipping through my small fingers, the shame of crying while he stood in the doorway watching. Hours later, an X-ray proved what I already knew. The bone was fractured, but even then, he told the doctor I exaggerated pain. That pattern set itself deep. Every fever, every injury, every sign that my body was breaking dismissed. To him, pain was a performance unless Anna felt it. Then it was courage. For me, the rule was simple: endure in silence or be humiliated. And so I learned long before the army gave me a rank that survival meant swallowing my voice whole. By the time the army released me on temporary medical leave, I already knew where I'd end up. My savings had run thin, and the apartment I'd rented near the base was gone within a month. There was nowhere left but the same quarters at Fort Bragg, where my childhood discipline had been forged. Walking through that familiar front door felt less like returning home and more like being reassigned to a post I had never volunteered for. My uncle wasted no time re-establishing his command. At dawn, before the fog even lifted from the pine trees outside, he barked me out of bed. Calisthenics in the yard, a run around the block, push-ups until my arms shook. Not as recovery, he said, but as character reinforcement. Breakfast was a quick march of chores: scrubbing, hauling, sweeping. It wasn't work so much as punishment dressed in routine. Anna made her appearances too, always at the right moments, always with an audience. She would stride into the kitchen in her pressed Marine Corps fatigues, shaking my uncle's hand like they were comrades, not uncle and niece. Then she'd glance at me, lounging in the doorway with that grin, and ask loudly how my civilian vacation was going. My uncle chuckled at the jab, and the message landed exactly as intended. I wasn't a soldier anymore, not in their eyes. The walls closed in tighter than they had when I was a child. I had no car of my own, no way to leave the base housing without asking for keys my uncle kept in his pocket, like a set of shackles. He called it accountability. I called it control. My phone, too, was subject to his scrutiny. He'd ask who I was texting, whether I was wasting time. He never took it outright, but the unspoken threat was always there that privacy was a privilege I hadn't earned. I stopped answering calls from friends, even from a few old squad mates who reached out after hearing I was back. Each ring of the phone carried the risk of him demanding to see who it was, and I didn't have the strength for another interrogation. So I learned to shrink again, to keep my eyes down at meals, to nod when he assigned another drill, to bite my tongue when Anna laughed too loud. The army had trained me to stand tall in firefights, but back in that house, I moved like a private under constant inspection, waiting, always waiting, for the next order, the next test, the next way to prove I was never enough. The days blurred until my uncle announced the next mission. We were to host a formal dinner for Brigadier General Margaret Braun, an old family patron who had guided his career decades ago. She was turning 80, and the celebration would be held under our roof. The weight of it landed squarely on me. Menu planning, shopping, scrubbing every inch of the house, and preparing the meal itself. It all became my assignment. Anna offered a lazy salute when she heard, promising to supervise. I threw myself into the work because refusal wasn't an option. For days, I hauled boxes of china from the attic, polished silver until my hands blistered, bent over the oven until the heat blurred my vision. Each lift, each twist of my torso sent a hot stab through my side. What had once been a dull ache had sharpened into something far more insistent. By the morning of the dinner, every breath felt like pulling against barbed wire. Guests arrived in pressed uniforms and dark suits, the smell of cologne mixing with roasted meat and garlic. Laughter rose in waves from the living room, but I stayed in the kitchen, moving carefully, carrying trays, pouring drinks. Sweat gathered at the base of my neck, though the air felt cold. Anna, of course, found her stage. Standing in the doorway, she raised her voice just enough for the room beyond to hear. She looks like she's staging a performance again. Careful, folks. She might faint for sympathy. Her chuckle was swallowed by a few polite laughs. I studied the platter in my hands, my vision swimming. My uncle didn't even glance up from his chair when he called back. "Pull yourself together, Lieutenant." The word, once a title of pride, fell flat, stripped bare, a command with no honor attached. I gritted my teeth and kept moving, serving plates as if nothing was wrong, though my knees shook with every step. The room spun slightly, the chandelier light too sharp against my eyes. And then, in the middle of it all, the front door opened. Cold air swept in, cutting through the heavy warmth. A new voice carried across the laughter, a voice I hadn't expected. Major Lucas Schmidt, Army physician, comrade from overseas. His gaze swept the room once before landing on me, and in an instant, his expression shifted from polite guest to urgent physician. That was the moment the ground beneath our silent charade began to crack. Dr. Lucas Schmidt crossed the room before anyone could offer him a drink. His eyes locked on the way I held my side, the stiffness in my shoulders, the shallow rhythm of my breathing. He didn't bother with small talk. "When did this start?" he asked quietly, his tone clinical, precise. I shook my head, forcing a brittle smile. "I'm fine," I whispered, the words reflexive, drilled into me by years of dismissal. But he didn't buy it. His hand hovered near my arm, steadying me without touching, then louder, so the entire room could hear. "She needs medical attention right now." The laughter stuttered to silence. My uncle stood, jaw clenched, voice cutting through like a blade. "That's unnecessary. She's exaggerating. We don't need a scene in front of guests." His eyes flicked toward the general at the head of the table, his fear of losing face outweighing everything else. "This is not a drill," Schmidt snapped, his voice rising with a rare steel. "She could collapse any second. Call an ambulance." The authority in his tone shifted the air. Even Anna fell quiet, her smirk faltering as Schmidt crouched slightly to meet my eyes. "Breathe for me, Lieutenant," he said slowly. I tried, but the effort clawed at my ribs, leaving me gasping. That was enough for him. He waved sharply toward the door. Now, within minutes, EMTs filed into the house, their equipment bags thudding against the polished floor. Oxygen mask, vitals, murmured urgency. The scene no longer belonged to my uncle. It belonged to the professionals who refused to look away. I caught a glimpse of his face as they lifted me onto the stretcher. Pale, rigid, but still defiant. He muttered, "She'll be fine. This is overblown." Yet no one was listening to him anymore. The ambulance ride blurred into sirens and fluorescent lights. At the hospital, scans revealed what my body had been trying to tell me. Fractured ribs, a pooling of blood near the lung. Proof undeniable. When I opened my eyes again, another figure stood at my bedside. Taunt Ingrid Weber, my mother's younger sister, former Army nurse. Her uniform was long retired, but the resolve in her eyes was as sharp as ever. She took my hand without asking, her grip warm and unshakable. "You're not going back there," she said, low and steady. And for the first time in years, I believed someone. Ingrid didn't waste time. While I lay in the hospital bed, oxygen hissing softly beside me, she spread papers across the tray table like she was preparing for battle. Medical charts, imaging results, the EMT's report, all gathered with a precision that came from years in uniform. She even had a written statement from Dr. Schmidt, crisp in its detail, noting my fractured ribs, the shallow breathing he'd witnessed, the danger if I'd been left untreated. I tried to push it away. "Ingrid, it's done. I'll heal. No one needs to know more than that." My voice was thin, tired, carrying the old habit of minimizing. Her eyes cut sharp into mine. "Sophie, if you stay silent, they'll bury you again. Do you understand? They'll rewrite this until you're nothing but a weak soldier who tripped over her own shadow. And you'll have to live inside their version of you. Her words lodged deep, pressing against something raw. I had spent years surviving by swallowing truth, convincing myself that silence was strength. But lying there, bruises blooming across my skin, I saw the cost of it more clearly than ever. By the time I was discharged, Ingrid had already contacted the military police. They came in uniform, notepad in hand, voices even but deliberate. I told them the story piece by piece. My uncle's shove, Anna's laughter, the collapse in the kitchen. Each detail felt like tearing open a wound. But Ingrid's hand stayed steady on my shoulder, reminding me I wasn't alone. 2 days later, proof arrived without me lifting a finger. A voicemail from my uncle, voice-controlled but laced with fury. Dramatic, ungrateful, tearing this family apart. Then Anna chiming in, mocking me for needing outsiders to fight my battles. Ingrid saved the recording, her face grim. They just gave us ammunition. Still, doubt crept in at night. I wondered if anyone beyond Ingrid and Schmidt would believe me. But then messages began to appear. Old squad mates reaching out. One wrote, "I remember you limping on patrol. You said you were fine, but we all knew something was wrong." Another admitted they'd seen my uncle dismiss injuries during visits home. Their words didn't erase the years, but they planted something I hadn't felt in a long time. Validation. The silence I had lived in was breaking, piece by deliberate piece. And for the first time, I wasn't the only voice telling my story. The hearing took place in a quiet military courtroom, its walls bare except for the American flag and the seal of justice. I sat at the long table, my uniform pressed, my ribs still aching beneath the fabric. For years, I'd felt small under my uncle's shadow. But that morning, the room felt different, like the balance of power was shifting in ways I had never dared to imagine. Dr. Lucas Schmidt spoke first. His testimony was steady, clinical, irrefutable. He described my symptoms that night, the danger of internal bleeding, the medical scans that proved the truth. The judges listened without interruption, pens moving across paper. Then came Taunt Ingrid. She wasn't just my aunt in that moment. She was a veteran nurse, her voice ringing with the authority of someone who had carried wounded soldiers off battlefields. She laid out the evidence with precision. The records, the photographs, the swelling visible across my chest. Each fact chipped away at the silence that had protected my uncle for so long. Then the recording played, the courtroom speakers filled with the sound of my uncle's voice, sharp and dismissive, calling me ungrateful and dramatic. Anna's laughter followed, mocking me while I struggled to breathe. Hearing it aloud, surrounded by uniformed officials, stripped the words of their power. What had once been private humiliation became public evidence. The verdict was read and clipped, measured tones. Colonel Hans Muller, guilty of abuse and endangerment. His honorary status revoked, placed under probation, barred from contacting me again. Anna, though spared conviction, was formally reprimanded by the Marine Corps. Her promotion suspended, her spotless record tarnished. For the first time, their authority fractured in front of me. When my name was called, I stood. My legs trembled, but not from fear. I met the panel's gaze and spoke plainly, voice low but unwavering. I've carried silence like armor for most of my life. Today, I needed to stand without it. The words weren't rehearsed. They came from somewhere deeper, the place where years of pain had finally found release. I walked out of that courtroom, not as a niece still seeking approval, not as a sister outshone, but as an officer who had reclaimed her voice. For once, the silence belonged to them, not me. After the verdict, the air felt different around me, lighter, though not entirely free. Wounds don't vanish with a gavel strike. They stay, aching in the quiet, waiting to be given shape. So when the Veterans Hall invited me to speak, I agreed, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because silence had cost me too much already. The hall was filled with rows of uniforms, some crisp, some faded, some tucked into wheelchairs. Families sat among them, faces drawn with the weight of stories never told. I stepped to the podium, my chest still tender beneath the jacket, and let my gaze sweep the room. I was taught. I began. That silence is strength, that complaining is weakness. For years I believed it, until silence nearly killed me. The words seemed to loosen something in the air. I told them about the kitchen, the pain that doubled me over, the way mockery had been louder than compassion in my own family. I spoke of Dr. Schmidt stepping in when no one else would, of Ingrid's fierce protection, of the moment my voice finally broke through years of dismissal. I didn't soften the truth. I let it stand raw and steady because hiding it had only served the ones who tried to erase me. When I finished, there was no applause at first, only stillness. Then slowly, hands rose. Men and women stood one after another, sharing fragments of their own. The medic whose injuries were brushed off as exaggeration. The wife silenced by rank and reputation. The veteran who carried bruises no one asked about. Their voices filled the hall until it felt less like confession and more like reclamation. A week later, the local paper ran a headline. Lieutenant Sophie Muller turns trauma into justice and change. My uncle's name was buried in the article, stripped of glory, while Anna's reprimand spread quietly through the Marine Corps. Among the community that once idolized them, silence followed where admiration had been. I closed my speech with the only truth I knew for certain. Silence is the enemy. Speaking out saves lives. That night, standing outside the hall, the air cool against my face, I realized it was a victory I felt. It was steadiness. For once, I wasn't carrying the weight of being unseen. I was simply a soldier who had chosen to stand. And this time, people believed me.